Thank you so much, Erica, and thanks for the invitation to join you all. As the Operations Director of the Tribal Child Care Association of California, I'm honored to open with this land acknowledgement. We understand and acknowledge our place on Native lands and are mindful of the past and present participation in colonial legacies. As partners with more than 80 Native American tribes in California, we stand in solidarity with all Indigenous communities and strive for cultural consciousness, respect Indigenous practices, and take responsibility to amplify Indigenous voices. We acknowledge the pre-contact Indigenous population in California, represented on the map you're viewing now. It was one of the largest and most diverse in the Western Hemisphere and spoke over 300 Native American dialects and as many as 90 languages. We acknowledge that the culture and heritage of the entire state rest with the Indigenous people who have continuously lived upon this land since time immemorial. We recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon Indigenous peoples in California and the Americas, including their forced removal from ancestral lands and the deliberate and systematic destruction of their communities and culture. We recognize how policies, systems, and structures continue to oppress and erase Indigenous people and their ability to remain in tribal communities on tribal lands and continue traditional practices with their tribes even today. There are currently over 100 federally recognized Native American tribes in California, and even more communities and tribal groups who are not currently federally recognized. California has the highest Native American population in the country. Los Angeles and San Francisco have two of the largest urban Native American populations in the United States. We make it our mission to support these resilient and resourceful communities by raising the voice of tribal nations to support equitable approaches for social services, policies, and practices through building relationships founded on greater consciousness of Native sovereignty and cultural rights. I've been in tribal early learning and care for over 15 years. I've been a direct service provider, a director, I've sat on boards and volunteered, and now I've been with the association for 3 years now. And our mission is to raise the voices of tribal communities and their needs. There's not a lot of data on tribal communities and their childcare. We're often left out of those numbers. And so there's not a lot of information. So our mission has been really to go to the communities to raise the voices, to see what those barriers are. And there is a definite need for tribal facilities. There's a definite need for a tribal set aside and training and technical assistance for tribal child care facilities to ensure that there's an equitable approach for tribal programs and quality programs for children and families in those tribal communities. There are 34 tribal child care development fund grantees in California that represent over 80 of the 110 tribes. And we're located all across the state of California in every county. Yet there are literally only 13 tribally operated child care facilities. Many of the programs are located in what are considered the child care deserts, and yes, often in low income areas. However, funding and location aren't the only barriers to tribes being able to develop properties and build facilities. Many tribal communities are reluctant to even apply for funding due to the lack of resources in their communities that are available. And in many communities where resources are available, the administrative workforce isn't there to even apply for the funding. And when there is, they don't have the technical knowledge to be able to apply for a facilities fund. Oftentimes, we just don't have the resources and the knowledge of building and planning. We don't have those think partners to support the dreaming and planning phase. The initial process for the land development, the environmental impact report, procurement packages, et cetera, that goes along with acquiring this funding deters many tribes from even inquiring into their ability to try to see the project through. I've experienced some instances where tribes had the opportunities to apply and they decided to go for it, only to have navigating the process of development without technical support leave them unprepared and unable to apply, or if they have applied, to receive the funds and see the project through. We all know children and families thrive in quality early learning and care settings. We know this to be true. Tribal families are also reluctant to send their children to non-Native programs due to historical traumas or the thought that their child will not be immersed in their culture and lose their cultural identity. Children and families who are lucky enough to have a tribal childcare program near them thrive in an environment grounded in cultural competencies. They develop a strong sense of identity, and the families join together in their community and take action and an active role in their child's education at an early age that follows them throughout and ensures their success later in life. We need more tribal childcare facilities. We must have a tribal set aside for facilities funding and training and technical assistance that supports the project from the initial dreaming and planning phase through the brick and mortar and to the doors opening to ensure that these programs are successful and that tribal families and children thrive. Thank you.